Okay, so back to what I was going to tell you. There's a chance I won't be here tomorrow. I might be here, I might not. And we're going to do the DBQ. You're right in class, but I really should be here when you do it. Because if you have any questions, I know I should be here. So we're going to do it on Thursday. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the war than I originally was going to. But the DBQ then, it's going to be about, I've told you about this before, the decision to drop the atomic bomb. It wasn't just solely about Japan, or might there have been other reasons? Maybe another really big country that could be anywhere. And so that's the question. So you're going to come and do a quick brainstorm of at least 10 things. It's for you. So use abbreviations, but things about the end of the war. And thesis and outline, and then quick write the essay. Now you're going to write the thesis for a 5-paragraph essay. Has everyone got that? For a 5-paragraph essay. But then for the actual essay you write, it's only a 4-paragraph. So I want to make sure you finish in the time allotted. So you're not going to do one of the body paragraphs. So normally we need 6 documents, right? How many do you have to have for this? 4. Normally for 3, you need to explain why they had that point of view. I dubbed it half, but remember that. Blank believed this because of. Remember that? How many do you need? Normally it's 3. How many? 2 in the essay. Sound good for everybody? Now, obviously, on the AP exam, you have a little more time. You have to add the additional 2, but you'll get the documents and go. Write on the documents, put notes, everything else, and the. No, you don't get the documents before. I'll have them stacked right here. You walk in, grab, and start. Yes, but I'm also taking away 1 paragraph. So, I know, we got to do it. I want you to sit down and get them and go. I mean, I think you've understood the documents, but now we got to do it with a little bit of a time crunch. You just have to get used to it. Yeah.
So the thesis will have like 3 reasons.
Yeah.
Just skip.
Yeah, skip one that you don't want. Is that fair? I mean, I want, and even in your essay when you write it, write the full thesis, but only do 2 quotes. No quotes. Well, you can use one time 5 words. That's it. No quotes though. Use your own words to show how it will reinforce or strengthen your thesis. And remember your thesis. Point, or take the main topic, the theme, take some kind of position, and then A, B, and C, the topics. And don't forget that packet I gave you, how hard the Japanese fought, and what might it be if they actually had to invade Japan. How effective American submarines were at basically starving Japan. The United States was firebombing all these Japanese cities, killing tens of thousands of Japanese civilians every night. Well, every night they had bombs. They would bomb till they ran out, then bomb more. Before they ever dropped the atomic bomb. And the important thing to think about that is a twofold thing. We've killed that many civilians and they keep fighting. Also, we've killed that many civilians already. Why not use the atomic bomb? What's the difference? We know the difference. But in 1945, they weren't quite thinking that way. They've already made the decision. We're going to burn thousands of civilians alive. We don't care. We're going to end this war. Yalta, the Yalta Agreement, the fear of the Soviets, the Japanese had one condition, the emperor, and the issue of unconditional surrender at Casablanca. Roosevelt said, we want unconditional surrender. He was talking to the Soviets. He didn't want the Soviets to quit fighting. He couldn't trust Stalin. But now we're stuck with it in Japan, too. All right. You ready for it? You excited? Would you like another little bit of an assignment? So we're still doing practice tests. And so this, due on Friday, instead of 6 questions, it's 25. The keys in back. Don't write on this so I can recycle them. They're good questions. The College Board made this. It's basically up to 1865. It's a really good review. The keys in back, please go through and grade yourself. Don't worry if you miss a few. It's not a big deal. What percentage do you want to get? Get 60 to 65%, you're in good shape. Hey, you get 100%, that's great. But don't worry if you miss a few. And hopefully when you go back and look at them, most of the ones you miss, you can go, okay, I can see why, I can see. Is it wrong?
No, I just thought it was hard.
Oh, some clown. Okay. Oh, it's only for 3 of them. By the way, if anyone happened to write on these from previous years, do not trust them. It's only 3. All right, then let's hand up your assignment you did over the weekend. I hope everyone did well on it. Just getting used to the way, just have a sheet of paper, I'll just take it. I'll give you a few points. I'm going to put all 3 together in just one assignment, so I'll put that in the grade book. Why don't you have it today? Where do you want the paper cut? Under your tongue? That's what that was? Cat-like footnotes.
I think this is probably Friday.
Oh, it's Friday?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Same deal?
I did. I realized that that was the one that I did last week.
Ah!
So I just.
How'd you know this?
Yeah,
Oh, good job. Now, I know you. That's.
I know I did one of them. I just didn't know. I just didn't scroll up enough on Teams. Yeah.
So, one more thing. Don't forget there is a group practice test in your review book. And I will post the entire key. I'll put it on the front page of my website. I'll do it tonight when I have time after 7th period, or time in 7th period. And I'll post it there and I'll post it on Teams. So you can just do it on your own. All right, so let's go and get to, I'm going to go through very quick a few things of the war. I'm going to do a little bit more than I originally thought. If tomorrow if I'm not here, you're going to watch a video. Did we get to the Polish corridor at all? So, we got the Sudetenland, right? Czechoslovakia, Germany took all of that. Where was the city where there was agreement where Britain and France would be equivalent or synonymous with appeasement? What city again? Yeah, Munich. And they'll talk about Munich over and over again. You're going to see rabid anti-communists called the Yalta Agreement. Another Munich. They do a good explanation of Yalta in that packet, and I know you guys can do that. All right. So now Poland. This bigger land right here is called the Polish corridor. There were ethnic Germans, a majority ethnic Germans there. And Hitler once again threatened war, saying they're being mistreated. Britain and France vowed to defend the really nasty military dictatorship of Poland. But he said the same thing about Czechoslovakia too. So Hitler didn't really believe him. Here's the Sudetenland. A lot of ethnic Germans here. Poland did have a strong army in the 1920s, but they had let it decay in the 1930s. But Hitler has a problem. Even though he doesn't think Britain and France have the guts to do it, if they do, it might lead to another two-front war. Remember World War I, where Germany had to fight the Western Allies and Russia, at least up until 1918. So, Germany is worried about the Soviet Union. But the Soviets, the mortal enemy to the fascists, they can't come up with an agreement with France and Britain. And Stalin is very worried. The Soviets, Stalin specifically, to get rid of all potential enemies, the Soviet Union had begun what they call the purges and the terror, to eliminate every potential enemy within the political party, also set up slave labor camps to move the Soviet Union into an industrialized power by hand, killing millions. And the Red Army was gutted. 2/3 of the Soviet officers were either imprisoned or even executed. So the Soviet army was not ready. Now, when the army is ready to go, they're going to be very loyal to Stalin. Hitler did the same thing to his own allies too. Stalin learned. So Stalin, having killed most of these people, realizes he's not ready for war either. He knows he'll probably have to fight Germany, but not yet. So the two mortal enemies agreed to a non-aggression pact. The Hitler-Stalin, sometimes it's either the Russo-German, whatever, but the Hitler-Stalin pact. It's non-aggression. They're not quite 100% allies, but essentially they are. Everybody was shocked. Here is the agreement being signed, Stalin looking on, and the weird marriage, because both of them stated their mortal enemy was the other, and now they're friends. But I love this cartoon. Could you see the revolvers? One of them is going to betray the other. One of them will. Stalin's trying to buy time, but he also wants land. They agreed to split Poland in two and also take other areas like Latvia and Lithuania. So Poland's doomed. Poor Poland. This was in secret. Also, as a trade agreement, Germans would give some of their technological advancements, especially in steel production, for Soviet oil. This area right here still has some of the biggest oil reserves in the world. That's Russia's power today. Part of the reason why they thought they could get away with invading Ukraine now, because the Western countries needed the oil, so they wouldn't do anything, which is partially true. That is why, do you catch this cartoon, why it's such a good cartoon from 1939 to the oil wells? They knew how important that was. Germany has no real oil supplies on their own. They need to import it all. So, jumping right to this. So on September 1st, Germany attacked Poland. Now, the Polish army was poorly in place and poorly led right along the frontier. And the German plan, even though almost all their army, 90%, their transport was still horse-drawn and most of their men were still marching. Only 10% were mechanized on vehicles or in tanks. And it would be that way for the whole war. Germany concentrated all their tanks, called panzers, these light, not very good tanks right here, in 4 spots, and did these big encircling movements that encircled hundreds of thousands of Polish soldiers and totally took them by surprise. This is the Germans will dub this Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. And it's going to emphasize using tanks to break through the enemy and then encircle. Now, it implied in German propaganda, it made it seem like they reinvented war. And this terrified everybody. But actually, they were just using the same tactics that both them and the French used back in 1918 in World War I. But now they had tanks and planes. And the Polish, the French, and the British thought the Poles would hold out for a month because they, here is a newspaper headline from that era. Okay, this is the Onion again. Obviously, Poland was not the menace. Get it? So I think that's pretty funny. But this is my favorite. Belgium hides. Also, I enjoy this one. Japan forms alliance with white supremacists in a well-thought-out scheme. Yeah, that didn't work. Okay, so, because they did with white supremacists in Nazi Germany. But that's the actual from the Daily Mail in London. Britain and France did declare war. But they assumed Poland would hold out for months. And so they just started to mobilize their forces. And Britain had a tiny army, so they had to quickly build up forces. And it fell. Poland fell really fast. Oh, by the way, that's what made it a world war. And almost immediately, there's unrestricted submarine warfare. They didn't start bombing cities yet, but that's coming. All those steps of total war I told you in World War I, they're going to come step by step. Gas didn't, but horrific fire bombs and, of course, atomic bombs did. The Soviets then, 2 weeks later, they attacked Poland, and Poland fell. And Poland will go through 6 years of war. A third of the Polish population is going to be killed, including almost all their government leaders, intellectuals, teachers, and the second largest population of Jews in the world are now either in German or Soviet hands. The largest population of Jews in the world was in the Soviet Union. There were very few Jews in Germany, and most had fled. Slightly over half had fled. Of course, unfortunately for them, they fled to Poland. And so with that, thus began 6 months of what's going to be dubbed the Phony War. Both sides did nothing except look at each other over the frontier of France and Germany. And soon, a British columnist would dub this, instead of blitzkrieg, sitzkrieg, because no one's fighting. Get it? Because they're sitting. Okay, I think it's pretty good. My favorite one is this lone British pleur. I'm sorry, French pleur, soldier, just sitting in an open field, just on a chair. For some reason, that kind of makes me laugh. Both sides begin to mobilize, and France thought they were ready. They learned from World War I that whoever attacks is going to be slaughtered. And so they had this very elaborate defensive line named after their former defense minister and veteran of Verdun, the Maginot Line. And it's going to fortify the German-French frontier, especially this area right here. Now, it's not going to be like one line. I always had this vision like the Great Wall of China. So it's going to be all the high ground, especially here, will have fortifications. So anybody going by will have guns trained on them no matter what road they take. And these forts are going to be very elaborate. And then there's this heavily forested area called the Ardennes. They assumed nobody would attack through. And then Belgium. Now they figured the Germans would attack here. And that's where they'll meet them. That's where they're going to meet them. So that's their plan. And these forts are amazing. They had underground railroads, they had dormitories, they had hospitals, they even had suntan places, so they could go and get like a little artificial sun as they're inside all the time. They had turrets overlooking every single road going into France. You can understand after seeing this why they felt very confident. And this was their lesson from World War I. The problem is they still kind of thought, their generals thought they were fighting World War I and they're going to basically totally misuse the great French army. And so Germany would break the Phony War in April by attacking Norway and Denmark. They didn't control their supply lines. Denmark had no real army and surrendered in a day. Norway would kind of fight, even though they only had militia, but there were a lot of traitors in Norway. That Aryan garbage really played well in Norway. I think you know why. The British and French, especially the Royal Navy, tried to stop it, but it failed. And the Germans would take Norway. And that was quite an eye-opener. Now, fortunately, the tiny German Navy was pretty much used up, but that's another story. And thus, a month later, the Battle of France began. And this is kind of the World War I Part 1. This was the whole element of World War II Part 1. And remember, World War I, 4 years, France held out and then won. And the assumption was it would happen again. This is what we call foreshadowing. German forces marching in Paris. It happened so fast. It's done. In fact, one of my favorite books on this is called Strange Victory. Because here, I'll put this up here, and it didn't focus very well, so it's focused on the screen. Here's the Maginot Line, defended. Here are the best British and French troops. And their idea was to march into Belgium and stop the Germans right here. This was heavily forested, so only lightly defended. They thought nobody could advance through the Ardennes, and I've been there. It's really rugged. You know, this is a European area. It rains all the time, so every 10 feet there's a creek. So you always have to go all the way over these little gullies. And that's where the Germans attacked. By a combination of various reasons, they threw everything to try to sneak through here and then break out. And it worked. They broke out right here. And then, here's the brilliance of the plan. Instead of going to Paris or something like that, they turned north and cut off the best forces in Belgium. It's an all or nothing plan. Germany does not have the resources for a long war. France was preparing for a long war. That's the plan. And it worked so well. Hitler was told by his generals it would never work, but he supported the plan by a couple of generals who wanted it. After this, Hitler couldn't be overthrown. And these are German forces on the advance. Here is the sickle where they cut him off. To give you an idea how bad French communications were, they were fearful of radios. They thought they would always be overheard, and they would, the Germans would gain intelligence. The largest tank battle up until 1943, world history, is going to be fought right here between the French and the Germans. The French won the battle, but the communications were so bad they retreated. That should give you an idea of the problem the French soldiers had. They had better tanks than the Germans, but they misused them. And so in a week, they were cut off, and French morale collapsed. Ironically, with Neville Chamberlain, the same guy who did Munich, he was ousted from power on this very same day the Battle of France began. Not because of that, not because of France, but because of the fiasco in Norway. It wasn't because of Munich right here. It was because of Norway. A very unpopular member of parliament who was kind of a pariah, but was always one of the few warning against Hitler. He's right here. Was invited into the wartime cabinet. He served in the World War I wartime cabinet, but he was a major pariah. His name was Winston Churchill, and Churchill became prime minister. And Churchill, for the most part, was involved in all kinds of crazy schemes and generally not that popular, except for about 3 months, where arguably he saved the world. That's kind of a big deal. Yeah. It just said Chamberlain ousted for power on May 10th. This one? Yeah. Oh, did it switch again?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Why is it doing that? I didn't realize I did that. And his decision to pull out the British troops, to pull the British troops from Europe. He thought the French were being defeated and got to pull them out. He didn't tell the French, and they're furious, and they have never forgiven Britain for this. And then Britain helped liberate France. They really haven't forgiven him for that. By the way, there's a lot of him doing this. V for victory, right? If you turn this around, that's the equivalent in Britain of giving somebody the finger. So don't do that, especially in Britain. And don't do that in Edinburgh, or you'll be punched. Okay. No, that did not happen to me. I'm just warning you. So don't go like that. All right. So he pulled it back to one of the few remaining channel ports, a tiny little port in a place called Dunkirk, right here. And this is where Hitler will make the first of his fatal mistakes. Instead of ordering his tanks, the Panzers, to sweep down the coast before the British could fully get there, he ordered them to stop. Hitler couldn't believe how well they did, and he thought, we better consolidate our positions. But that allowed, in the first week of June, every ship they could find in Britain to go to Dunkirk and pull out troops. They thought they might be lucky to pull out 40 to 50,000. They were just hoping. They ended up pulling out 330,000. Now, they didn't have their equipment, but this evacuation would allow Britain to stay in the war. Here are British and French soldiers lined up on the beach, over 200,000 British soldiers. The French forces would be pulled out, and they wanted to go back and fight, but they would all eventually surrender. On the right, they're trying to stop against German air attack. Combination of luck, tenacious French defense to allow them to retreat. Most of them didn't even have their rifles when they made it back to Britain, but they could stay in the fight. If they would have only pulled out 20 or 30,000, which was a distinct possibility, Britain might have sued for peace, and we'd have an entirely different course of history. It's one of the great what-ifs in history. But all the best forces France had would be devastated in Belgium. It wasn't really defeated, it just crumbled. And so with that, oh, I should add, Italy, seeing blood, totally ill-prepared for war, they entered the war, and this gives me the excuse to show Mussolini in a bowler hat holding a lion cub. I know that's the picture you've been waiting for all year. Italy was totally unprepared for war. Everything they tried to do was an absolute disaster. And in 1943, Mussolini would be overthrown. Germany would just occupy northern Italy. Here are Italian forces in the Alps. But with that, France, army, the morale in the tanks, defeatism took over, and they would surrender on June 22nd. And they would eventually surrender in the very same railway car. Here's Hitler walking away, that the Germans surrendered back in 1918. Here he is right after they surrender, basically just going like this. And then Hitler spent a half a day in Paris like a tourist. There he is in front of the Eiffel Tower. The only time he ever went to Paris. Yes, that is a weird, creepy picture, but I thought a good one to show. He visited Napoleon's tomb, you know, things like that. This is shocking how fast France surrendered. And then southern France, is this the right slide? Oh, here's them marching through Paris. Stepping through. That's one of the more famous pictures from a newsreel footage of a Parisian crying seeing Paris fall. And this shouldn't have happened. The French army was too good to be beaten like this. France has never really recovered from this. Never really. And then, to make matters worse, southern France would have a government that they collaborated with the Germans, called the Vichy Government till the end of 42. They occupied this area. They collaborated with them under Marshal Ferdinand Pétain, a hero of World War I, who was basically become pro-Nazi, and they would participate at the end of 42 in the final solution. And France, once again, they collaborated with the Germans. A lot of French civilians did. A lot resisted, and there would be free French who would fight against the Germans, but they really struggled with this. What do you do with people in your own country that collaborate with the Germans, with the enemy? What do you do? So Britain is alone, but Churchill vowed to stay in the fight. Hitler couldn't believe it. Britain was defeated. They actually kind of talked about maybe we should give Germany some colonies and call her quits. Hitler just assumed Britain would quit so Germany could finish off the Soviets. But Germany stayed in the fight. And this is going to lead to one of these battles. By the number of men involved, it's not huge because it only involves the Air Force. But it's going to be called the Battle of Britain. August through October of 1940, even though bombing would go on until 1941. And what it is that Germany is going to try to force the UK, Britain, to sue for peace. They're going to act like they're getting an invasion ready to cross the English Channel, but Germany can't get past the Royal Navy. So they're going to use their Air Force, thinking they could bomb Britain into submission. And they thought, okay, the Royal Navy is strong, but Britain also has a really powerful Air Force. The Royal Air Force. And that became the plan. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, to knock out the Royal Air Force. Through attrition. Kill so many pilots. Destroy so many planes. And here are German dive bombers. But as it turned out, the German dive bombers were really vulnerable. They were already obsolete by 1940. And many of their bombers didn't have enough range. Their fighters didn't have enough range. And British fighters always seemed to be there to peck away at German bombers. And the British were also making really good fighter planes, just pure luck. They made planes called the Hurricanes, and those are a plane called the Spitfire. And even though the Germans or the British lost a lot. The Germans were losing too. And the Germans totally underestimated radar. The anti-science Nazis disregarded radar. That was why. Here are radar operators, here are radar towers on the coast. There were always a few British planes that peck away, peck away, peck away. And if a German plane shot down over London, you can't save the pilot. And so with that, Hitler in October got bored. And he resorted to what the British are going to call the Blitz. And the Blitz, it switched to terror bombing with the goal of kill civilians so they get angry at Churchill and force the end of the war. But the RAF and therefore Britain survived. Civilians are going to go through hell. This is a German Hinkel bomber flying over London. They're going to go through hell. But a terrible mistake by Hitler. Because the RAF, it was close. In October, it might have worked. It might have worked. I don't know. And so with that, Britain could stay in the war. And Hitler had already ordered his generals to prepare to attack the Soviet Union. Eventually, through 41, over 43,000 civilians killed, 139,000 would be wounded. The Germans would resort to night bombing because of the high loss ratios. And with night bombing, they couldn't hit specific targets, so they just tried to bomb civilian areas and kill as many people as possible. These are spotlights, searchlights trying to find German bombers for anti-aircraft. And the thing was, it didn't work the way the Germans thought. Total war thinking was that the civilians would get mad at their own government for not protecting them. But who did the British civilians get mad at? Yeah, they got mad at Hitler. And what did they want? Yeah, revenge. And they'll get it. They'll kill many times more German civilians in night bombing attacks. They'll kill 43,000 German civilians in one raid in Hamburg in 1943. Total war. So those are civilians in a subway sheltering themselves from the bombing. That St. Paul's somehow survived the war. By the way, that building look familiar? The U.S. Capitol's a complete 100% copy of it. It's kind of weird, just a little bit smaller. Girls' home was destroyed. This bombing was awful, but a precursor to war in the modern era. Who are the targets? Civilians. What are the Russians doing right now in total war? What did the United States do in 2003 in Iraq? Targeted civilians. They act like they don't, but they do. The horrors of total war. And with that, Hitler, though, had already ordered the beginnings of Operation Barbarossa, the attack on the Soviet Union. The attack was going to be on the longest day of the year, so a limited time to attack. But in the spring and the fall, there's massive rains and mud when everything thaws in Russia. You can't go on the ground. So they wait for it to thaw. And the plan was to invade the Soviet Union. And I love this one with Hitler putting the knife in Stalin's back. That's a pretty clever one. But Lebensraum we talked about. And remember fascist anti-communist rhetoric. That was a whole reason for the Nazis to take power. But also oil. Hitler did not want to be dependent upon the Soviet Union for oil. He wanted to take that oil between the Caspian and the Black Sea. And this would turn out to be Hitler's fatal mistake. The second to last fatal mistake. The German army was not big enough. They didn't have enough equipment. Most of their transportation was still going to be horse-drawn. The Soviet Union is massive. The Red Army might have some problems in their officer corps, but they're huge. But everybody in the world thought, once they basically did this three-pronged invasion into the Ukraine for resources, Moscow, and Leningrad, the Soviets would fall in 6 weeks. That was the plan. That was the plan. But this would turn out to be Hitler's fatal mistake because the Soviet Union survived. And the German army advanced hundreds of miles. In places like Minsk and Smolensk and Kiev would surround 2 million Soviet soldiers. Yet they survived. Here are Soviets this is German soldiers in the advance near Smolensk. And they got closer to Moscow, and the Soviet Union in trouble, but held on. And by fall, they're still fighting. And the Germans thought they would be done by the end of August, at least into September. And this is soon be dubbed a War of Annihilation. Total war to its extreme. Nobody, or there'll be no peace agreements. It's either total victory or total defeat. These are German soldiers on the advance. Those are Soviet refugees. 50% of POWs taken on both sides would die in camps because of horrific mistreatment. Slightly more by the Germans, but both sides. This was a total war of annihilation. As an example of this, following behind, special detachments of SS. They did the same thing in Poland too, but this one on a much greater scale. So these are lots of German troops they could have used at the front. Instead, now the army helped with this, but it was SS. They were going to kill all the political leaders, these undesirables. Some religious leaders, even though there were very few in the Soviet Union. Teachers, communists, known Communist Party members, and also Jews. And hundreds of thousands, into the millions, would be led out to the forest, men, women, and children. This is in Estonia. Here is a mass grave, and these are Jews and educators, communists who were executed in Ukraine. We don't know exactly how many, but hundreds of thousands would be murdered. And this was the concept that of total war. If Germany's going to conquer these areas, there's going to be massive numbers of enemy within. Remember what I told you, where most of the Jews lived in the world. They lived in Poland and the Soviet Union, and those areas they're just conquering. But by fall, the Germans outrun their supply line, and then when fall hit, they were immobilized by mud, and then it got cold. At first, they could move on the frozen ground, but pretty soon their engines froze. Their engines froze. And so they tried one last gasp, all or nothing, the Battle of Moscow. December and January 41 and 42, a last gasp. The German army was, there, so many things had broken down or destroyed. Here's a corduroy road over the mud. Here's a German tank advancing into the snow. The flag is to German planes. It's a German tank. The army got to within sight of Moscow. But then the Soviets counterattacked. And this would become the first turning point battle of the war. A massive Soviet counterattack stopped the German advance and pushed them back about 50 miles. Moscow was saved. It wasn't a total victory. Those are Soviet forces on the advance. But the Soviet Union stopped them. All the German propaganda and defeatism assumed that the Germans would win an easy victory and the Soviets won. This is really important. If the Soviets could stop them, what else can they do? By the way, there are a lot of Soviet forces right here on the Manchurian border in Siberia, fearful of Japanese attack. They had spies in Tokyo who told them, Japan's not going to attack the Soviet Union for their ally, the Germans. Japan's going to attack someplace else that December. So the Soviets could pull these troops for the counterattack. They knew about the Japanese attacks in the Pacific in December. Stalin knew. So with that, Germany, though, is not done. But Stalin would dub this war the Great Patriotic War. Here are Soviet troops marching for the, in Red Square. They're marching through town, literally going to the front. And that's why World War II in Russia is the Great Patriotic War to this thing. We all call it World War II. They dubbed it that like immediately after Britain and France declared war. But in Russia, the Great Patriotic War. And in 42, Germany tried one more time. They're going to advance now just in the south to the area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, take the oil. So it's about resources. And once again, they advanced hundreds of miles, but they outran their supply line. They didn't have enough troops. And then Hitler decided they must totally take and hold a city named after the leader of the Soviet Union. Today it's called Volgograd, but then it was Stalingrad. And Stalingrad is going to be hell on earth for 5 months. As Russian soldiers, here they are entrenched on the waterline, are going to fight German soldiers building by building, stairway by stairway, sewer by sewer to try to hold this city. And some of the most horrific fighting of the war. Yes, in Western Civ, I cover this a lot more, but I'm not going to here. Here's some of the fighting up to January 1941. Bloody, awful fighting. But eventually, winter stopped the Germans. The Soviets counterattacked. Here's Stalingrad. They put big sweeping pincer motions here and surrounded them. And this would change everything. Stalingrad would turn into a decisive German victory and the second turning point of the war. The counterattack, second turning point. What did you miss? Did I say German victory?
Yes.
A decisive Soviet victory. Thank you for giving me that look.
I'm so confused.
And now the Germans can be beat. Thank you for giving me that look. The Germans can be beaten. Now think about it for a second. In 41, when Germany attacked, nobody thought the Soviets would last 6 weeks. Germany is unbeatable. Germany, like literally, maybe they are Superman, and there's something in that fascism that makes them into all-powerful soldiers. They defeated France, and nobody thought France would win, and they just assumed the Soviets would win. And not only did the Soviets stop them, they beat them. And then, the next year, the Germans tried their last offensive, the Battle of Kursk, basically to pinch off this little salient here. But the British had once again broken the German code, and the Soviets were waiting. The Germans attacked, they pushed in a few miles, and then were stopped dead in their tracks. And then a decisive, war-changing victory. The biggest battle in world history would end with the German army's backbone. So after July of 43, there is absolutely no way Germany could win. Now maybe there could be some kind of peace made, some kind of conditions. The Western Allies did not want that, but the Soviets had done that. And if the Soviets could beat the Germans, what's going to stop the Soviet Union? They might go all the way and take Berlin, and they might keep going. The Western Allies had a few hundred troops fighting in North Africa, and that's it. The Soviet army had 25 million men, had taken the death of almost 20 million Soviets, and still beat the Germans. How could little United States stop them? There must be something in that communism that makes them 10 feet tall. And then at Yalta, they said they're going to attack the Japanese. How are we ever going to stop them? Let's show them. Okay, moving on. Did you catch my little hint there? And this is going to lead to a massive Soviet counterattacks, where they advanced into Russia, pushed the Germans back. They would outrun their supplies, bring supplies up, advance again. And the Germans fought for every inch, but there's no way they could win. And this is going to be hell on earth on the fighting on the Eastern Front. No prisoners. Well, there'll be prisoners. Very few prisoners is a better way to put it. So, while this is going on, there are slave labor camps being created. Over 1,000 concentration camps are going to be created, but most of them by 42 are going to make up for the lack of German mobilization. Millions of slave laborers, especially people your age, should be used kind of as for ransom to control the people back at home, would be slave laborers in German factories. And yes, they would fight back through sabotage, just as slaves in the United States fought back, risking death. tens of thousands would die, but there would be millions of refugees after the war. But that's how Germany did it. These concentration camps would be slave labor camps. Here's a young boy. He is Jewish, as you can see here, but some Jews would work in these camps, some not. Here's one of the most famous concentration camps. It's called Auschwitz. It was in Poland, and this is how they fought back. Picture I took. You see the B? Remember art mock free, work makes you free. I showed you in the other picture. You see the B? One of the slave laborers made the sign and made it upside down. Fight back in some way. It's, I mean, pinpricks, I know, but it worked. We have not quit. But then Germany was sitting there with what they call the Jewish question. And what of the Jewish question? What do you do now by 1942, where you're fighting a war of annihilation, and yet you have this massive population inside areas Germany occupies that they consider to be a mortal enemy? And if they win, they're going to make that into Greater Germany. At first, they tried to isolate Jews. These are Jews in Poland being sent to what, this is a medieval term, kind of a walled-off area in cities called ghettos, where they began to actually purposely kind of starve them to death, the ones they didn't need for factories. But the Einsatzgruppen was relatively ineffective. So the Jewish question will lead to the final solution to the Jewish question. At the Wannsee Conference, which is a resort outside of Berlin, now it's a memorial, those are the Germans who met there, mostly SS or German civilians. They decided to slaughter all undesirables. Find an efficient way, they would use eventually Zyklon B, a gas, to murder them. And this became the #1 priority in Germany. Their rail network, their bureaucracy, all geared towards shipping people to a common location to murder them and then burn the bodies. Think about it. They're fighting a war for their very survival, and their #1 priority is murdering people within their own country. This shows you the insanity, but also the hells of their bureaucracy. How did you get promotion in Germany and get rank and prestige? By how many people you killed. That's something we know almost exactly how many people they killed. They're going to set up death camps. And using the rail network, they'll set up these death camps right here. There are 7 of them in Poland, where they will centralize the killing. There. They're all here. The first would be here, then eventually Belgium, the Netherlands, and France in the early 44. And they would operate till literally the Russians liberate. And on that happy note, so if I'm here, I'm here. If I'm not, you won't see me. I feel your pain. So, if I'm not here, we'll have a movie. If I'm here, we won't. Sound good? By the way, I know I covered a lot, and I skipped a lot. You might know. I'm sorry. Or not sorry at all. Have a good day, everybody. I'll see you. Are you going? You're going Wednesday, right? Thursday. Okay. Thank you. See ya. Thank you for giving me the funny look. See ya. Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good day.
See you too.
Do you have the numbers for the train? The full numbers?
I don't know.
Because I know I used to. But I don't know.
I thought we left them with the library after like a year ago.
I thought so.
We're in the lead, like, one.
know either. I'm a little bit confused here. I really thought.
Yeah, I don't know. I have the electronic. I've got them all on my computer. They can just print them off if they need, but.
I don't know.
Okay, I'll send one of the librarians,
Okay, now.
Susan Selvig sent me an email. So.
All right, send it to me. I just haven't seen it.
So, all right, I will, I'll just respond saying we don't have them, that you and I both thought that those stayed in the library.
I really thought we left them in.
I do too. I was surprised when I got that email. In fact, I don't think we've had them for a couple of years.
Maybe we not. I don't.
Maybe we should ask Lee what he's done. All right, well.
Yeah, you always check it for that. Where is that?
What is it?
I'm 99% sure that we left Central Division of Grade. We can't find it. If we can't find it, it's coming out of your paycheck.
How much is that?
More than you got. More than you got. So you're going to be working 20, 30 years down the road, and your paycheck's going to be garnished. We're going to take money for your paycheck. Hey, wait, I'll be dead.
Wait.
I know what you're thinking. That sounds unfair. Huh?
You think I'll start working when I'm 40?